My Govanen. Hello there! I'm the Tolkien Shed, and today we'll talk about another element that the Rings of Power lack, and that is setup and payoff. So, setup and payoff, what are they? Payoff is any kind of revelation, twist or discovery, and setup is everything that leads to it. Everything that makes us suspect what will happen, or when it happens, that makes us believe that it could happen. It is a basic storytelling tool closely tied to cause and effect. It can be argued that you cannot write a story without setups and payoffs, and it is certain that you cannot write a good story without them. So it is very telling that the Rings of Power lack these elements, especially setups. The problems with setup and payoff are present in the Rings of Power, from its details to its major storylines. The show often wants to have a certain payoff, but the setup for it is illogical, too short, or sometimes even non-existent. The most frustrated I was with the show was when I watched the scene when it was explained that the elves are dying and Mithril is their only hope, and my frustration came from the fact that there was no proper setup. There was almost no setup. The only thing we got was this one scene in the first episode when we saw a leaf falling down, covered with some black something. And that's it. We got nothing more to indicate that the entire race of elves is going to die. Imagine if the story of elves living and fading was treated in the same way in The Lord of the Rings. In The Lord of the Rings, the elves are leaving Middle-earth, their light is fading, and the threat of Sauron is too great. The only thing that was preserving the elven light was the three rings, and their fate is sealed. They are going to either fall under the power of the one ring, or when it's destroyed, to lose their own power. So the elves must leave Middle-earth or slowly fade and die. And it is shown throughout the whole story. It is deeply rooted in the world. We see the characters speaking of that matter. We see them making decisions connected to that. We see Gandalf, Elrond, Galadriel talking on this very subject. Even more important is the story of Arwen. We see her preparing for departure, but finally deciding to stay. She chooses the fate of a mortal woman, but other elves have no such choice. And, this setup culminates in the payoff. In one of the last scenes of the whole story of The Lord of the Rings, we see the ring bearers gathered in Grey Havens. Frodo, Bilbo, Gandalf, Galadriel and Elrond leave Middle-earth forever. And because of all the setup, we feel the connection to those characters. We feel the expected emotions. We are sad to part with them. We are also surprised and even more troubled because we do not expect that Frodo will also leave. But all of this is logical. We see how and why the elves and the ring bearers leave. And we understand that the story of the elves is coming to an end, and those characters are also going to leave. Imagine if there was no setup. If we got only one scene in the first hour of the Fellowship of the Ring. if it was just said that the elves are dying or living somewhat, somehow, somewhere. And it would be even worse if the story of the ring bearers leaving Middle-earth was crucial for the further development of the plot. It is not so in The Lord of the Rings, but it is very much so in The Rings of Power. The story of the elves dying is the most crucial element that there is. And the consequences of that are present in the finale of the show, of the first season, and will be present in the following seasons. And there is no proper setup. We see no elf dying, no elf being ill even. We see no danger, only a tree being sick from something. We never get a reason for all of that happening. There is no time limit that we understand. One leaf is not enough to foreshadow the death of the entire race. There is another scene that enraged me, and it again shows us that setup and payoff in this show are really poorly executed. There was the scene of death of one of the elves. He dies in the trenches, orcs kill him, and it's played out as a very sad moment, understandably. There is this music, very mournful, and close up on Arondir's face, and there is slow motion. It all reminds me about Boromir's death in the Fellowship of the Ring. But there is one difference between Boromir and this elf. With Boromir, we got the entire story of the journey of the Fellowship, we got the battles in Moria, we got this conversation between Aragorn and Boromir and Lothlorien when those characters were developed very much, and we got the last stand of Boromir when he defended Merry and Pippin. Then he dies, and then we do care. And there is no way that we can care about this elf. He was in 2 scenes, in one of which we learn that he smells. That's it. We do not care about him, and similarly, we do not care about one of Isildur's friends. He dies after Mount Doom erupts, and, well, his name is Ontamo, and that's the only thing that I remember about him. He had a few lines, and, well, that's it. We are supposed to care. Speaking about not caring, let's talk about Arondir and Bronwyn. The payoff of their relationship, their storyline, is very obvious. They kiss. But, again, there is no setup for that. We do not have anything to really connect us to these characters. We do not know why they love each other. How did they come to know each other? What do they have in common? What are their differences? We know nothing of that. The relationship seems forced, artificial. So the payoff does not work. There is also the payoff of the watchtower falling on the orcs, but there is definitely no setup to show us that the Southlanders tried to weaken the construction of the tower. So it seems as if one arrow could bring down the entire tower, and that's just ridiculous. Another example of weak setup is that there was no way for a Numenorian camp to be set up. See what I did there? There was no time for Numenorians to prepare this place of gathering, this shelter. for the survivors of Mount Doom eruption. There is just no way, no time. It's impossible. But the camp is there, and we are supposed to believe it. And there is also no setup for sudden appearance of the orcs after Mount Doom erupts. After the battle, when they were defeated, there was only half a dozen of the orcs, but after the eruption, there is plenty of them. There is enough to take over the Southlands. So there is nothing to set up. Where do they come from? How is it possible? We never learn. Now, those were examples of poorly executed setup. Let's talk about instances where setup is present, but there is no payoff. It is certainly a case with the storyline of Halbrand. It is said that he is going to unite the Southlanders. It is the very reason that Halbrand goes to Middle-earth with Numenorians, and that the Numenorians want him to go with them. But when he comes to the Southlands, he's just announced the king, and that's it. It goes nowhere, and there is no real payoff of that. There is also no payoff for the hitless fire that is there when Gandalf falls from the sky. Nori notices that the fire is not hot, and that's the only recognition of that fact that we get in the entire show. It could be very useful as an illusion, as a distraction, and maybe a tool for Gandalf to learn to control, to show us his progress, but it leads nowhere. It is mentioned only once and forgotten forever. And so is the case with the Hobbit sign language. It could be very useful when the hobbits hide from the cultists, but then they speak. Maybe that's the reason for them being discovered. If they use the sign language that they have, because it is shown in one of the episodes, they would be maybe safer. But, well, it is very quickly forgotten. Well, those are the examples that I chose for this episode of Why Did the Rings of Power Fail? There are certainly more of them. I invite you to share your observations in the comments. I will read them all. I thank you for every comment. I welcome every new subscriber. And I hope to see you again very soon. Fare you well. Nova Year.
Subscribe right now, you little hobbitses.